Hi there, folks. I am Chris Vander. I'm a senior product manager here at Google, working on the enterprise team, and we're going to have a little fireside chat about enterprise. I'm going to switch over to the wave, so we're going to have a wave going here. So feel free to add things to the wave, and we'll try to get to them. But before we get started, maybe I'll just have the rest of the folks here on the stage introduce themselves. Evan?
Hi, I'm Evan Gilbert. I'm an engineer on our marketplace efforts.
I'm David Glazer. I play number 5 for the San Jose Sharks and do some engineering for our developer products.
I'm Scott McMullan. I work on the enterprise partner team and marketplace team.
And Ryan Boyd. I'm a developer advocate engineer working on the marketplace.
So thank you all for coming out. Let me ask maybe a couple questions just to get us started. So David, one of the things that didn't get talked about today in the keynote was some of the recent announcements on storage. Can you just give us a brief summary of what was announced today and how it impacts enterprise?
Yeah, the short answer is it is not yet relevant to enterprise, but it will be. So there was an announcement today that we have a preview of a Google Storage for developers offering out, which lets people that want to store bulk data in Google's cloud do so with a very simple API: upload, download, get at your data. And when I say it's not yet relevant for the enterprise, as you saw with the announcement of Google App Engine for Business, there's a bunch of work and packaging and integrations that you need to do to take a product that's good technology and have it be good enterprise-ready technology, and that has not been done for this preview product.
Scott, contextual gadgets just launched yesterday in Gmail. Can you give us an idea of what the enterprise use cases are for contextual gadgets?
Sure. Contextual gadgets for Gmail, one of my favorite extension points. We've been very excited to get these out for a long time. The reason I'm so excited about them is because, let's face it, folks spend a lot of time in email, and they get a lot of inbound, and they want to get more efficient at that. And so contextual gadgets can be used, and we're already seeing they're being used for everything from, I have an invoice I need to be approved. I need a simple approve, deny button. Let's make that easy. Let's put that information right in your Gmail flow, and let's talk to the system that actually would approve the invoice. Up to salespeople who are doing biz dev who want to figure out where they got they got a lead. Do I know this person? Who knows it? So reach out into social networks. Pretty much anytime you get an email, there's probably some additional relevant information from some sort of enterprise context that you could bring to bear to make a decision better, and people are starting to experiment with that already.
Cool. Okay, let's go to the wave for maybe a couple questions. Maybe we'll just use this. I'd be interested in a Google Apps account as an individual, bringing all of my personal Google services together into a more closed and manageable system, but with the potential to transition easily to a professional service. Thoughts on this? So anybody in particular want to take?
Can you read that again?
Yeah. I would be interested in, so this individual is looking for a Google Apps account to bring I think all of the sort of personal services like Picasa and so forth together and transition that into something like Google Apps.
So the good news is we've wanted that ourselves for a long time, and I forget exactly when we announced it, but a month or so ago we said yes, we are starting. Last week. Okay, felt like a month or so.
A long week.
Yeah, it's been a long week. But yes, their little color on it for anyone who's interested is internally there has always been a distinction deep in the system between Google accounts that are part of a Google Accounts for your domain offering and Google accounts that are just used for regular consumer usage. And the distinction was there for an important reason, which is in the case of a business, the accounts need to have a third party who has some oversight over them. There's an admin that has the ability to create accounts, to turn off accounts, to reset passwords, to do things like that, and to control what users can do with the accounts in the context of that work context. That rippled further than ideal into what services you could use, and that's been being undone, and that's what we announced last week. So hopefully that's what the questioner wanted.
We've got another one here, which is a little bit, maybe not super germane to developer, but we'll take it anyway. When enterprises start moving to the cloud, they'll have a period, short or long, with a mixed environment, cloud and on-premise. What's the advised order to migrate? E.g., first email, then how can I select email address from CRM on-premise? Maybe this is one that I will tackle, since I work a bit with the enterprise deployment team. So generally speaking, your order to migrate will depend on your enterprise. So it does make sense to move individual users completely at a single time. And if you do run in coexistent mode, things like these gadgets, the contextual gadgets that Scott was talking about, will certainly remain relevant and easy to use for those new users. And beyond that, it's really a question of how your calendaring works.
And we do actually have ways that you can connect the cloud applications to your on-premise applications. There's a technology called the Secure Data Connector, which allows you to create a secure tunnel from cloud applications to your on-premise apps and make sure that you have all the data in the right context, whether it be in something like gadgets or an app engine.
If there are any questions from the floor, happy to take them too.
So can you repeat the question too? And then in the future, if we can actually ask people to go to the microphones, that'd be great.
So the question was, is there any plan to have a container where you can have a parent company and a series of child companies in Google Apps? What are we saying about that at this point? It's something that we recognize is very important, and we're working on it. Yeah, so it's done with Postini, hasn't it? Yes, absolutely. It's been available in Postini, but multi-domain management has not yet and is not today available in Google Apps.
I'm not sure if I've just missed something, so apologies if this is buried somewhere in docs and I just haven't looked in the right place. We're doing synchronization things between our application, which stores a lot of contact details, and wanting to push those details into the contacts within, obviously, an app's arrangement. The contacts as we see them on our end, because we're dealing with business information, are shared. So that contact, that person, is somebody that every user is able to see and work with. But when it comes to pushing them into the Google platform, that namespace is, as far as we've been able to see, tied to individual users that are performing the synchronization. I know in the case of docs and things like that, you can have like global readable areas if you're on the premium or paid versions. Is it the same thing with contacts, or if I missed something, or is that actually a gap in the product at the moment, like a shared contact list?
For the premier version of Google Apps, there is actually a shared contacts API,
Okay.
which allows you to put contacts in there that are accessible to the entire domain.
Okay.
Are you aware of that?
No, I wasn't. That's the bit that I thought I might have missed.
Okay,
So thanks for
it's
clarifying.
definitely there, and
Okay.
you should check it out.
Thank you.
We use it at Google, so that it'd be hard to get work done at Google without having the whole 20,000+ people available in autocomplete, for example, and
Yeah.
they are.
Excellent. Thanks.
Okay, maybe I'll go back to the panel for a sec and let you cogitate. Or no, yes, I'm going to go to the panel. I got psyched out. Let's see. David, how do you think App Engine for Business is going to change the way that developers are building enterprise applications?
The short answer is it'll give them more choice. And we think it's going to give them a choice that they're going to find really attractive for many of their apps. Did any of you have a chance to attend the talk that Ben Fried gave earlier today on how Google is using Google App Engine internally? Any just hands? Just curious how many of you. Okay, good 20 or so people. Certainly what we've found internally is that there's a large class of applications for which having the power of App Engine to hide the details from you is a perfect fit for many internal applications. And it's a perfect fit because internal applications don't always have a huge budget in terms of engineering time. They don't always have a long or a known long life cycle, so it's hard to know how much to invest in them up front. And therefore, people are limited in how much time they can spend in actually creating one of these apps. And if they have to spend a week or two getting it deployed and managing the overhead of actually getting it out there, and they only have a week or two to build it, that means half their budget is going to plumbing. If you're building Gmail, you have an awful lot of development budget, and if you have to spend a week or two or a month or two on plumbing, it's okay. You're amortizing it over multiple years of engineering. But if you're building an app where you've got weeks to invest in it, the beauty of App Engine is that it takes minutes to do the plumbing and the deployment. So for the apps where it fits the programming model, which is a growing number of apps, I think it's going to be a big attractive way to do it.
Well, let's go to the floor. Yes.
An announcement a couple of days ago about Google Apps Script having access to on-premises SQL. I couldn't find any documentation on it. I'm assuming that's through the SDC and the feed server in the absence of anything else.
JR, are you still in the room? I saw you earlier. Doesn't look like it. The perfect person to answer your question had stuck his head in earlier, but no.
I actually didn't think quite yet that it was through SDC. I mean, I think that's the eventual goal of that sort of access, is to go through SDC. I think at this point it's actually making direct connections for SQL. But yeah, on the documentation side, you definitely, if you search for Google Apps Script, at least the last time I searched for that, like a week or two ago, it was actually the first result in the wonderful Google search engine. So you should take a look, and if you don't find the docs, come see me after this, and I'll definitely help you try to find that.
There's a session on AppScript, and I'm looking now if it was today or tomorrow, and that would be a great place to learn more, ask that question tomorrow. So there's a session tomorrow on AppScript where the right people will be probably answering your question in the presentation, and if not, you'll know what their faces look like.
Yes, next.
Okay, a prior session was about the Buzz API, and is Buzz going to be available with Google Apps soon? And if it's going to be available, is it a way for a company to be in the testers for Google for Buzz in Google Apps in hosted domains?
I'll take this one. We can't really talk too much about the future of that particular product, and so I can't say when that would be available or even what the specific implementation would be. But over time, we are working very hard on giving admins the ability to delegate authority to various features and to grant more granular management capabilities within the domain. So it's certainly aligned with the direction we're going, but I can't comment on it.
There's two things we can say because we've said them. One is that absolutely Buzz is going to be available to domains with admin control. That was part of the plan from the day we launched Buzz, and so that's still very true. And the second is that we use it internally in that way. So it's already in the stage where Googlers are the only domain that is using it that way, but it is in use. This is not a wish, this is code.
Okay. And is there a way for a company to apply and
we haven't done any trusted tester program or invite program for domains.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, how about a question for Evan? Evan, what sort of security concerns should developers think about, specifically for enterprise apps?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we're doing with Google, with our marketplace and the apps that plug into Google, is that they have broad access to data that is for the Google customers. And with that, there are a couple things you need to do. One is you need to think about security very closely. Your customers are trusting you with their core data in their enterprise, and you need to treat that data as if it were your own, or possibly even better. And the second thing with that is don't ask for more data than you need. We're going to roll out more features over time that let you get access just the data you need to interact with Google. And so if you don't need access to a user's doc list, don't take it, because all it does is creates a liability for you in the future.
Great, thanks, Evan. Let me go to a question from moderator. Where does Google invest the largest dev effort within apps and enterprise, just so we, systems integrators, can adjust our strategy? Well, David, what's your take on this as an engineering director?
there's two halves to the question, and one is where do we invest our engineering energy in Google Apps that are relevant to the enterprise, and the other is where do we invest our enterprise-specific energy. So let me say what I mean by that, and I'll try to answer them. I'm killing time here by taking the question apart. Most of the offerings of Google Apps for the enterprise are the offerings of Google Apps. Most of Gmail for your domain is Gmail. Most of Google Calendar for your domain is Google Calendar. And so most of the investment in Google Apps for the enterprise is actually not enterprise specific. The bulk of the engineering is relevant to all of our hundreds of millions of users, including the enterprise specific users. Then there is another set of work, which is the minority of the total work, which is what are we doing to take the general offering and make it relevant to the enterprise. And that probably, there's two big categories. There might be another one I'm missing. The two big categories are administration and interop are the two categories. Administration means all the things to recognize that there's now a third party with an interest in your data. So whereas if you use Google Calendar in your personal account, there's you and there's Google, and that's the conversation. Whereas if you use Google Calendar in your work account, there's you, there's Google, and there's your CIO, your IT admin, whoever that is. So all of the applications that are enterprise relevant always have some level of control. A simple example, most of you probably know this, but a simple example is, are you allowed to share a document with somebody outside of your domain or not? And that's a choice that the admin is given that can restrict the choices the users have. So that's one whole category, is admin controls over the suite of apps, turning apps on and off, turning features on and off, things like that. The other category is interop, and Chris, maybe you can say more about the kinds of things we do there. But this is very, I think of it as very bushy work. It's not deep work. It's lots and lots and lots of small important features. It's making the contacts work well with the Outlook contact schema in detail. It's I don't know. Do you have other examples of interop kinds of things?
Sure, we do a bunch of interop-related work primarily to help domains get their data out of legacy systems, like domains that are trying to move from Exchange or move from Lotus Notes, or who want to share a Google Calendar, free busy information from some of their users with other users. So we do things in that space.
And then the last one I'll add is the area that I at least want to be the biggest area of where we invest in our enterprise apps is the code that you write. And that means, and that's the intent of the apps marketplace, is to put the hooks into our apps so that you all can extend them. And I think the contextual gadgets that were released yesterday that we just talked about is a perfect example of that. I would like to see the bigger amount of velocity of new features, new enterprise-specific features being added to be coming from you all out there in the ecosystem, building on top of the platform that we add, because Google tends to be very well organized and very good at building things that many, many, many people want, and we're not as well structured to build things that only thousands and tens of thousands of people want. But things that tens of thousands of people want are very attractive businesses in very important areas that aren't our sweet spot.
Thanks, David. Let me go to Scott for one question. We just talked a little bit about the marketplace. David touched on it. What's progress in the Google Apps marketplace been like?
We've been very pleased. We've been out for about 2 months. We've seen over 1 million customers, or over 1 million users, get access to marketplace apps through the installations there. And I think one of the coolest things and most satisfying from my perspective has been kind of the breadth of applications that have been developed, that have been adopted a lot. So we don't release a lot of very specific numbers, but if you look at the types of applications that our customers are coming to the marketplace, looking around for, and actually installing and trying out, it really ranges from single user productivity tools like an aviary for photo editing online, which is something that someone in the marketing department may pull down, all the way to an ERP suite, to a lot of attraction CRM and project management. So it's the breadth of kind of interest has been satisfying. So I think it bodes well for us to continue to work with a broader section of vendors, and really to try to David's point, make Google Apps much more of a platform than it is today. We've definitely got to start there, but we really want to tap into the creativity of both customers who want to build things for themselves, as well as other ISVs who want to build things for sale.
Please, question from the floor.
Yeah, I was curious how the Google Chrome store that was announced today fits with the app store for Google Apps. Is there any synergy there that's planned? Are they totally separate? Is this like a consumer versus enterprise kind of separation, or?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that as a product guy. There's a very clear separation in these two marketplaces. The things that you buy for your business or your organization that work in a Google Apps domain, you're going to get those from the Google Apps marketplace. Things that are web apps that are consumer focused, those are in the Chrome App Store, and they're designed to work in Chrome. There's not a Chrome focus per se in the Google Apps marketplace, and it is definitely much more B2B.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say that there's definitely an organizational purchase and a consumer purchase, but then there's that kind of prosumer, power user. And we've got a lot of folks in the marketplace today. For example, SlideRocket. Again, as an example of a high-end presentation tool, you may just want to go out and use it for yourself, find you love it, and then introduce it to your organization. So having multiple kind of channels and ways that customers can acquire things from the web is going to give us a lot of upside and choice for users across the board, consumer to business, and everything in between.
Yeah, just two small points to add. One is when we talked about it internally to be on the same page in how we describe it, and one of the analogies that worked for me anyway was you go to Home Depot, there's the contractor's desk where they buy their lumber, and then there's the desks where the rest of us buy our lumber. And similar products with some commonalities, but different businesses, different kind of transaction, different needs, therefore different interfaces to buy them. My other point is that for the places where the developer needs are the same, such as what standard are we going to use to figure out who the user is, what standard are we going to use for permissions, going to be based on the same underlying security technology, the open technology of OpenID and OAuth. So, places where it makes sense to share it, it will be shared.
Another question from the floor.
Hello. Can you talk about your plans to enable enterprises to manage their internal deployment of Android devices?
I think you should wait until tomorrow talks about Android a little bit. But I will say that there is device management for iPhones in Google Apps, so you can see a clear trend right there.
Hi. I know that you cannot tell too much about dates and plans, but can you tell us a little bit about what you're planning with Google Voice and maybe additional communication options like multi-video conferences and this kind of applications?
No.
Nothing?
I can say that there are some telephony apps in the marketplace, and there are other solutions out there that are looking to integrate with Google Apps. But
sorry.
Just a quick question around Google Groups and kind of where that's headed, in terms of, is it something that there are going to be APIs released for, or is it something that might merge with other products? Is there a directional strategy, at least in an enterprise, of taking Microsoft Exchange public folders and having a tool to get that data into an email-enabled container?
We did actually launch Google Groups for Google Apps, and the Groups API, this is part of the provisioning APIs for Google Apps, does allow you to have some management control over the Google Groups and set up a new Google Group and that sort of thing. So you might want to check that out.
Well, more around, so right now the API lets you manage the name of the group, but not actually get to any of the content.
Okay. I'm actually not aware of any APIs for getting the content currently.
Generally, what we suggest to people that want to do this type of thing is you can actually use the sites APIs. You can create sites, you can add data into sites. And Sites actually provides a very rich way to manage content. And we've actually had developers build software that works in sites. Office Sync is one example of a piece of software that saves documents to sites. So that's one place you can go. Beyond that, the specific things that we're planning to docs, to groups, I'm not aware of.
And actually, you might also want to check out, there's a session tomorrow, might not seem relevant by the title, but on gadgets in Google Apps. And in that session, the speaker does go through a ticket tracking app that he built as a demo. And one thing that he does is sets up a group, but it has the email go to App Engine as a place to then process the emails and manage some of the emails. So depending on your actual application, there may be some other solutions available.
We'll take a question from the moderator. How to explain the keynote emphasis of HTML5 and then the use of Google Sites as is? Any plans? So I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but Philippe is in the room. So Philippe, okay, yeah, can you maybe clarify for us?
Can you go to the mic?
I was wondering, and I've not seen that product evolve so much over the last month or so, so I was wondering if there is any plans to...
Now, there's someone who thinks on the velocity that we like. Product hasn't improved in a month and he's impatient. So are we. Okay, now I understand the question. Obviously, Sites uses standard HTML. It's a standard web application. It runs on all modern browsers. All of that. What I think the center of your question is, you're saying, how come it's not using the coolest, newest features? How come it's not taking advantage of things that weren't possible 2 months ago but might be possible now? I think I don't have a specific answer in terms of Google Sites, but every product team has their set of priorities where they look to enhance things and looks for the ones that add the most value to their users. We do not have a company goal to say, hey, we're going to use this new technology because it's shiny. An example that was shown in the keynote, it was in the keynote this morning, the Gmail one? Yeah, that was in the keynote this morning. When you're sending a mail with an attachment, right? There's a simple piece of HTML5, the ability to drag and drop from your desktop, that meets a very pressing need in the product. And so that was a high priority one. I think there probably are some good enhancement possibilities for Google Sites. I don't know where they are on that team's list, so I don't have anything specific to say. Just want to be clear that it does support HTML, obviously, and priorities are driven by what the team believes are user value, not necessarily by using the newest technology.
Yeah, I was going to say quickly, I'm not sure if the goal of Sites is necessarily be the most advanced HTML editor. It's a lot around collaboration and making it easy to build websites, but not necessarily to be the cutting edge of web technology.
Great.
Yes.
Hey guys, thanks for doing this. Love the idea of Google Apps as a platform that's extensible by the ecosystem. Can you help us think through how that's going to apply on mobile devices, and in particular on Android? Should we be thinking about that primarily as a web experience or via kind of Google's clients for Google Apps? How should we be thinking about extending Google Apps in a way that's going to be applicable on a mobile device?
I think Sergey just said that the native client and the web browser were going to converge at some point. And he's, so apparently he's just defined the future. So I guess don't worry about it until, it all gets cleaned up. David, what were you going to say there?
The first thing that came to mind is something that Vic pointed out in his opening remarks this morning, which is open standards and open communities and freedom to choose is often messy. And it's a fun messy, because it's the messy that's what keeps us all getting out of bed in the morning. I think the particular area you're asking is, it's kind of fun to watch the evolution of these different tracks and the crossover between them and the hybrid apps that are getting built, and where the moving trade-off point between the benefits of building a pure HTML5 application versus an application that takes advantage of device-specific capabilities, all I'm doing is agreeing strongly with the premise of your question and saying that I don't think there's a master roadmap that anyone in the industry, let alone anyone in Google, can say for exactly how those will trade off. Certainly, personally, my rule is when you can do the thing you want to do in HTML5, you get much more reach and much more predictable long-term reach by doing that. But not everything can be done there.
Ryan, so you spent a bunch of time working with developers in the Google Apps Marketplace. What are some sort of major takeaways that you've gotten from developers or major stumbling blocks they've encountered that they should be aware of?
Sure. I mean, so basically integrating with the marketplace is quite simple overall. It's basically integrating single sign-on with OpenID, a lot of open standards. There are a lot of libraries out there. Some people are trying to write their own, and that not only has some security problems associated with it, but also has usability problems. So, use some of the tools that are out there to make this really easy for you. We've had marketplace developers launch or create their applications in like 3 days, and then we've had ones that have taken a little bit longer. But there are a lot of libraries out there to help you with that. I'd also say, test your applications, talk to your customers about the different use cases for your application, and make sure to support those existing customers. The existing customers are often going to be the ones that are going to install your application first. You're probably going to notify them as soon as you launch on the marketplace because they've been asking for the Google Apps integration for a while. Take those existing customers into account, create good experiences for people when they install the application to not only sign up as a new user of the application, but also link up with their existing account.
Great. Let's take a question from the floor.
Hi, guys. Thanks for your time. Could you talk a little bit about the strategic vision for technologies like Wave or apps in a widget form and how they fit in with enterprise integration portal platforms like the LifeRays and the WebLogics and the SharePoints of the world?
I'd love to take a stab at this. There are probably as many ways of getting a job done as there are different kinds of businesses. And what we're finding is that technologies like Wave and Gmail allow businesses to accomplish different tasks more efficiently. So Wave is great when you have a conversation that needs to sort of evolve organically and go from a chat to email threads to discussions to documents. And we find that, so we at Google tend to use it when we do an offsite or when we do an event like this and that type of thing. So it becomes very, very valuable in that context. Whereas, when you're dealing with customers, you get incoming email, and you have to respond to that. And one of our goals, Sergey's always said that he wants email from Google to make you seem smarter. And that's why these contextual gadgets are interesting, because now these developers like yourselves can write gadgets that interact with email and help you seem smarter, whether it's CRM or whatever. That sort of extensibility builds on top of Google. So there's two dimensions. There's the how your business works, and then there's the extensibility dimension. I think what's interesting is that when you look at Wave, you'll see robots, you see gadgets, you can add things to Wave. We're continuing to add extension points to Gmail. You've seen left nav extension points, contextual gadgets. You can add gadgets and other containers to Calendar and to Google Sites. So, for example, one of the developers in the marketplace is using Google Sites as a repository for virtual machines. So you can go and you can select a virtual machine. Scott, what's the name of this company?
SkyTap.
Thank you, SkyTap. I want to make sure SkyTap got a shout out because I was using them as an example. But you can go to you can go to your Google site, seal your virtual machine, select it, and then run that VM right inside of Sites. So the notion here is that we will continue to add more and more places to extend, and there's lots of real estate for us. We have the document list that hasn't been extended yet, lots of options within our spreadsheets program. We have app script, but there'll be more that will come along. So we want to provide baseline functionality that helps you run your business more efficiently and keep your data in a safe cloud place. and then extend that ideally through third-party development. So that's sort of our approach.
And to kind of add to my previous answer, this is another really good advice for developers that we've actually heard from a lot of our vendors in the marketplace. In particular, you probably have seen a quote, or you may have seen a quote from Smartsheet, where they're really finding that their customers demand this deeper integration. Their customers find that integration with contacts or calendar and that sort of thing make their applications easier to use and more efficient for their businesses. So yes, single sign-on is kind of like the minimum bar for the marketplace in terms of integration, but you really want to go a lot further, and your customers will have those requests for you.
Did that answer your question?
It did. Yeah,
Good.
I guess a quick follow-on is, do you see yourselves gravitating or continuing to gravitate more towards a dashboard analogy, or more of a deconstructed widget approach, or to take sort of a forked path and go both directions at once?
You know, Evan, do you want to take a crack at that? Because you've taught me most of how I think about that particular one.
So just to clarify, the question is dashboard versus widgets, more general widgets? Yeah, so I mean, if I had to choose one, it'd be more general widgets. We want to have what we do at Google available everywhere, and the way it works isn't always a dashboard. I think contextual gadgets and sidebar gadgets in Gmail are great examples. And we also want to start finding ways both to bring your app into Google as well as to bring Google into your applications. So I think we'll see more of that because it's just too hard to roll your own set of UI widgets. We don't want everyone who works with Google to have to build their own UI widgets.
So I'm curious about, just in general in the audience in the room, how many folks are interested in kind of building web apps from the ground up for their businesses or for their customers for the sake of having a web application versus integrating it kind of an application layer on top of that. So application platform at the Google Apps layer versus kind of more classic web platform as a service, infrastructure as a service style conversations with Google.
Let's try to break that into yes or no questions, because it's
we have an open conversation here.
Hold
Everyone
up,
a mic.
3 fingers for A and 2 fingers for B. And how many of you are, one of the things that you're interested in, that you're thinking about doing over the next quarter is building an application, a web application, pretty much from scratch, using platform technology from Google, whether it be App Engine, some of our APIs, but just building a new application, and you're thinking of building it on top of Google technology. How many of you are in that category?
And
Okay.
can I ask, like, how many of you are looking at doing that for internal usage within your own company versus, let's break into the yes or no. Internal usage? Okay, how many of you are trying to launch that to the whole web and get a lot of customers? Okay. Great, thank you.
And how many of you are, well, first of all, how many of you have an app in the Google Apps Marketplace?
See, this is how we do market research. Thank you.
Keep those hands up for a second. And how many of you intend to have an app in the marketplace within 6 months? Okay, thank you.
How many of you would like to go to dinner later?
And I definitely encourage everyone to reach out to the vendors that are in the sandbox. If you're thinking about building an app on the marketplace, they have a lot of great experience and are happy to talk with you about what they've done and the different challenges and how they overcame them and what the great benefit is of the marketplace.
I'm going to make one obvious observation just from that last pair of questions. I think all of you in the room probably know this, but I've gotten asked it enough, mostly by press. The 2 first questions that we started with about building on Google's platform technologies and distributing an integrated app through the marketplace are intentionally and by principle and design separate questions. The marketplace doesn't require you to use our platform. The platform doesn't require you to use our marketplace. We think those are good areas that should not be tied together. They should work well together, but they should not be required to be tied together.
Let me try one for Scott. You've been spending a bunch of time talking with developers. What sort of verticals are going to be the most interesting for developers?
Yeah, profitable ones. Right now, I'd say that things that are customer facing have been historically asked of us. So I don't want to use the word CRM. So CRM, help desk, things that help you interact with your customers, collect money, and prospect. And that's a pretty broad category, but those types of things have been strong pulls. I would say in addition to a set of more admin-focused tools, we've got a handful of vendors who are really working with the IT shops who are adopting Google Apps and are extending our capabilities and around contacts, integration, migration, management. And so things that help our customers get more flexible deployments have also done well.
I'll tell you that if I were, I'm just thinking out loud, but if I were trying to answer that question for my small company and I were looking to do it, I would look for an opportunity to do some one-off work for some company who's already bought Google Apps, and I'd go to them and say, hey, I want to solve a problem of yours internally. I'd want to build a one-off. I'd try to nail it, and then I'd see if it generalizes, and that's just where I would look for it. So, some of the apps that Google's IT department has built for our own internal use, some of those feel like they probably are generalizable, and Google's not going to generalize them, but somebody else, very well might. And that I would look for those kinds of things where you nail somebody's problem and then expand.
Well, Evan, I know you spend a non-trivial amount of time participating with standards boards and thinking about things like that. What standards should we be paying attention to from the perspective of things are going to evolve, we need to, as developers, get more involved in them, or they're going to be more meaningful over the next years?
Yeah, really good question. So the core of working with the marketplace is identity integration. You have to know who the user is to get anything done. And closely related to that is calling our APIs. So you need to be able to call back into Google, get access to contacts, to get access to email, to get access to documents. So the two technologies there are OpenID and OAuth. And there's actually a new generation of OAuth coming out right now, OAuth 2.0, which will make your lives a lot easier. We have libraries to hide a lot of the messy details, but oftentimes these libraries themselves are not quite as polished as they could be, so good stuff is coming down the pipeline. And then also for embedding into Google, gadgets are obviously key technology. You'll note that all of these are open technologies. Basically, we don't like doing proprietary ways of integrating with Google because we think that's not very helpful to the web at large and ends up being self-defeating because people don't code to proprietary platforms.
How many people here have implemented OpenID or OAuth into an application? Okay. How many people could explain how OpenID or OAuth work, whether or not you've used it?
A lot less hands.
So that ratio is not surprising. When did I start using the phrase? Probably about 9 months ago. I started going to the teams and say, I want an objective, auth I can understand. And I said, okay, you don't have to explain it to everybody. I want you to explain it to me. And they got to me eventually, but it didn't mean anything because I'd had 9 months to be indoctrinated. And so my general comment on the state of those particular standards is they have been too complex. That is one of the reasons that not every hand went up saying I've used it. It's like if I said how many of you have used electricity, every hand goes up. That wouldn't have been true when electricity was as young a technology as OAuth is. And I
might not be alive any longer if you used it at that point.
But I will say that OAuth 2.0 is actually really is threatening to succeed at auth I can understand and anyone else can understand in a small amount of time. It ain't there yet, but there's, but it's getting pretty close. And the basic premise of, hey, there's locks, there's keys. OAuth 2.0 is a way for your app to ask for a key, and you can use the key to open any lock. Sounds good. There's a few details that I glossed over, but it's getting close, and it will be something next year that you'll all be able to raise your hand.
Yeah, and actually to follow on, if you understand cookies, then you're a long way towards understanding OAuth 2.0. So.
And to plug my session for tomorrow, I'm doing a session with one of our auth engineers, Dave Primer, tomorrow, who's apparently in the audience, right there. And we're going to try to explain OpenID and OAuth to you. And we're going to be going through some of the different use cases and how they apply. We're not going deep into the protocols, but trying to say there's all these different flavors of OpenID and OAuth. When should you use them? That's often been a question that we've been asked by the marketplace vendors. And then we're going to go through the evolution as the process gets easier for end users as each of these technologies have been rolled out in the different flavors. And we hope that it continues to get easier. I think there's the Internet Identity Workshop earlier this week where these standards are evolving, and I'm sure you can look up wiki notes on how things are going there.
Any other questions from the floor? All right. Oh, I prompted one.
Got to keep asking that, Chris.
I know. Go for it.
Okay, so totally non-technical, non-strategic question. With the growth of Google Apps for enterprise, are there plans to add an administrator track to Google I/O, or perhaps start an administrator conference?
I see a person in the audience who would probably have something to do with making that happen, looking thoughtful. It's a good idea. I haven't heard it before. I think in general, we're finding that the breadth of topics that are covered here is getting very, very large, very broad. And so there have been conversations about how to shard it without losing the ability for you all to sort of cross-pollinate with the things that aren't your day job. So we're trying to balance those two. But specifically, it would be for administrators of Google Apps is the general area that you think would be worth some focused attention?
Well, there's a lot of areas of Google Apps where there are very focused developer tracks on the their list. If there's an administrator track that has a more general, kind of a general section or two on that area, because that's obviously not going to be the depth of focus that developer track is. But there are specific administrator sections that could be beneficial for apps. I expect it is depending on the administrator last year.
So let's do the market research. Of the people in this room, not quite a random sample, how many of you would find Google I/O next year more interesting if there were an administrator track? Okay.
Nice. Well, considering last year we didn't actually have an enterprise track at all, I think a year is a long time. I think we should hope to add that next year.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Anybody else have any suggestions for us that you'd like to throw our way and watch us wince? No, go for it.
You look like you have one. Can you go to the mic?
Should I walk down like the aisle and do my Jerry Springer?
I noticed in the Universal Navigation More menu, now the apps that you install are in a determined sort order, alphabetical.
Yes. Isn't that funny?
It's great.
What happens when you don't write a requirement?
It was reverse alphabetical for a week or two. But
it was,
yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to have some control over the naming of the apps. So if you install Acme app...
Just put a Z in front of it, you'll be all set.
You're talking as an administrator.
Yeah, and this is not to overcome the sorting problem so much as just the branding of a tool that we provide for business use in the organization. We'd like to have some control over that in the menu list.
Thanks for that suggestion. It's a great one. It's something that we will definitely put on the list.
I'd say it's also a good sign that we actually have enough apps now that people are using so that you need the sort order.
This is another kind of administrator-y question. I know that for our domain, we were using Google accounts before Google Apps existed. And for some of us, like my email address has a Google account and a Google Apps account at the same time. And depending on where I log in and in the order in which I log in, I will receive vastly different things. I have no idea who to ask for help about this. But you guys are stuck on stage, so...
we're sorry about that. So this is what Dave was referring to earlier. There's this namespace conflict between those two areas. And we're working very hard to resolve that so that this will all sort of magically work. And you should look to it magically working soon. And you won't have to do anything.
Yeah, I will say that we are making Googlers suffer a lot of pain so we get it right before you have to suffer more pain. Google has the most of those conflict accounts of any domain out there. We ran the stats. We knew this was going to be a hard problem and ran the report. And Google.com was far and away the biggest instance of people with those collision accounts. And we found a few ways not to reconcile them. Let's put it that way.
Thank you.
So we're sorry. We're working on it. Yes.
Hi. Well, since we're asking administrator questions, here's a hypothetical for you. Let's say you're an administrator in enterprise, and you're trying to evangelize and you're trying to encourage people to move away from your legacy systems, onto a more of a cloud-based approach. And from your enterprise, I have Okay, whoops, there goes the hypothetical. But people have been telling me the two biggest concerns I've been getting from people are, one, they don't trust the concept of cloud completely, i.e., I don't trust storing it someplace it's not, that I can't physically touch. And then the second concern is a privacy concern, where, well, I don't trust a third company to have access to my data, even though they said they're not going to touch it. And I'm sure you've come across these questions before. What would be the best way to explain and ease those concerns to someone who's non-technical but signs the checks?
So the advice I would give your friend who the first thing I'd say is those are very legitimate concerns. Those are the right questions that we all should be asking, even when we forget to ask them, because the exposure is very real. The hypothetical risk is there. So although it's tempting for us here to make fun of those concerns, I find it tempting sometimes when I'm impatient. That's the wrong answer, right? Those are legitimate concerns. I usually do it by analogy, is how I start, and my preferred analogy to start with is, so what you're telling me is you don't have a bank account and you keep your money under your mattress because you don't trust someone else to manage information that's important to you and that you would worry about it being exposed to the rest of the world. And 60 years ago, 70 years ago, that would have been a legitimate topic of conversation, right? It's like, is it safer to keep my money under my mattress or in a bank? Maybe 100 years ago, right? To get the
years from now, it may also be a legitimate topic.
But that's a place where, over time, the standards, the habits, and the level of trust and the practices that made that trust worthy have grown. And now now it is obviously more secure and more safe to keep my money in a bank than it is with a third party, with many third parties, than it is to keep it under my mattress. And I think that trend is happening in many areas of our lives, right? The slightly tired one now, but a good about the same time frame one from Nicholas Carr's book, The Big Switch, is so you obviously have your own generator because you don't trust a third party to provide your power, right? That doesn't quite hit the privacy concerns, but it does hit some of the same ones. And I think that reasoning by analogy to say, hey, it's a very legitimate question, but it's a question of when, in this case, with this third party for this data, it's a good deal. And the answer more and more is it is a good deal. And then my last answer, which depending on who I'm talking to, is very useful. I've had this conversation with my wife, and my daughter's school is a customer of Google Apps, and so I've had it with people who aren't technical. My last answer is, we, Google, do not do anything that's not available to you all as Google Apps users to secure our Google Apps data. We keep all of our announcements, all of our product plans, all of our competitive information, all of that. All of that's exchanged by Gmail. All of that is in Google Docs. All of the presentations, and they're secured with the same mechanisms that we offer to all of you.
I think there's one other dimension there too that I'll add to this, which is that as developers, you have the same problems that Google does in terms of selling Google Apps. We have to address these same issues, and so as you build cloud services, you have to address these same issues. So I think David's answers are good, but you may need to start looking at ways in which you can validate the strength of your bank. We did SAS 70 Type 1 and Type 2 certification. Type 2 is where you get somebody from a third party to come in and say, did you do Type 1? And then they say yes. So it's valuable. But honestly, we did have a third party come in and look at the way in which we maintain passwords and which, to show that data is obfuscated at rest and things like that. So really paying attention to best practices and security and all those things are certainly paramount.
Yeah, and actually some obvious ones from the security question before even. Keep your secrets very secret. Make sure no one can get access to them. Log access to data so you know who's talking to what. And try to only give data out when people are online at their computer. That's something we're doing at Google a lot more now, is saying, if you don't have an active login session from a user who's been there with OpenID in the last X minutes, then you shouldn't have access to data unless you have the super duper master key, which is hidden away and locked in a safe.
No more sticky notes. Okay, next.
So as a follow-on to that, there's some environments where, like I work in the defense and intelligence space, and that can't go to the public cloud, right? Have to do internal hosting. Are you guys thinking about offering these platforms in a way where we can bring it inside the firewall?
We are intentionally not deploying Google Apps onto small hardware devices and things like that, because that is not the cloud. We don't get the same economies of scale that we do when we get to replicate data across 3 different data centers, in real time. However, when you look at the feds, now defense is probably a different deal, or you look at healthcare. Some information like HIPAA data is very, very special data, and it needs to be treated differently. And you just shouldn't ever send that information in email, period. It does not matter who your cloud provider is. You just should not be sending HIPAA data out. Similarly, there are additional requirements by the federal governments to do things like make sure there are very specific kinds of background checks. All of us went through background checks before we got hired at Google, as did all the people that run our servers. But there's some very specific types of background checks that you have to go through if you hold defense data, as you probably are aware. Those type of issues I think are going to get, my hope is that actually they get ironed out a little bit more over time, and we see the government able to move more and more to the cloud. I think it's a great opportunity, actually.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that one of our goals is not to force you to move all your data in the cloud in order to get value out of Google. So, you can use your email with Google, but continue to keep your privacy-sensitive data even behind your firewall and connect with SDC to it, and variations of that. You can keep your data stored in a separate system with its own privacy guarantees, and use Google for login if you want to, or not use Google for login. So there are many ways you can combine something that has different security guidelines with what you do with Google.
Well, I guess if you don't mind. So a scenario I have in mind, because you're right, I think federal civilian agencies are going towards the public cloud stuff, getting more comfortable with that. Defense hopefully might follow on and start considering it more. But in some spaces we have environments that don't have internet connectivity, let's say, but we've got multiple data centers, we've got private clouds going on, but they want this kind of functionality. So I'm guessing the answer is no.
It's really not on our roadmap. I mean, there are things that we're really, really good at. Building data centers is one of them. We do deploy our Google Search appliance, which can run behind your firewall, but that's a very different subset of technology.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Also on the same topic, I'm actually out of DC. In my former life, I had those background checks and many government clients, but in my new life, I watched yesterday with our gadget, Wayfind, that in 2 clicks, we had two-legged OAuth to all of people's email. And not to say that we're not doing all the right things for that, but it's a scary thought that in 2 clicks, everything is there. You guys are doing all the right stuff, but a little startup's doing all the right things. And I would consider, I brought up in the panel before with Ryan and Steve about, certain people having access to it as opposed to everybody. Like, for example, I have clients that we're working with that I know are testing apps at their companies, and they might have 100,000 users, but if they're installing a gadget, wouldn't it be nice if one person could try it out, or 5, as opposed to everybody, or even just a few people, but not from the practical, like, should I pay for 50 users perspective, more from the, like, is this legit, do I trust this kind of perspective? And also in the apps setup itself, in terms of in the marketplace, things that relate to security that go beyond just their privacy policy. I was just curious if you're planning on moving in that direction at all.
Yes,
cool.
Very strongly. We're planning a whole bunch of things in that area. We would really like to lead the industry in this space. We recognize that as more and more of your data is stored in the cloud, you need to be able to allow people to get access to it, manipulate it, or allow those applications to only touch objects that they create and so forth, or as Evan was pointing out, only touch them when you're in session. So these type of things are very, very, very important to us, and we've got a bunch of stuff in the works. And we're almost out of time, so we've got 40 seconds. We can let you go early.
Speed round.
Or we can do a speed round. I once saw Michael Moore do a speed round. It was amazing. Well, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for my panel, Evan and David and Scott and Ryan, and enjoy the rest of Google I/O. Have fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.